in Perth we have all different local governments.
Yep.
What do you have in Seattle?
Right, good. So Seattle is, the city of Seattle that I work for, it's city government, has 600,000 population. So it's a much larger city than any in the Perth area or anywhere else in Australia, I think.
Apart from Brisbane.
Brisbane, yeah. And we're in a metropolitan area that probably has 2 or 3 million people. So we're surrounded by suburban communities, each with their own council. And then we're part of King County, which is the next layer of government, and then the next layer of government above that is the state, and then there's the federal government, and then there's all kinds of other jurisdictions. There's the Port Authority, there's the school board, there's all kinds, it's incredible, our ballots just go on and on and on. So lots of different jurisdictions, but I work for the city of Seattle. And our government structure is a little bit different. We have more power at the city level, you have a little more power at the state level. But otherwise, it's pretty comparable. And our structure is very similar. We have an elected mayor. All of our council members are at large.
How many councils are you getting talks with here in Western Australia?
Boy, tomorrow I meet with the Stirling Council, and I'm meeting with Melville on Monday and Tuesday. I think that's it this time. I've worked with some others in the past. Yeah. But and I was here a year ago. I was down in Albany. I just came from doing work all over Melbourne area, Wagga Wagga, Cooloman, small towns, big cities. Yeah, it's been good. Yeah.
Have you had any experience in implementing this community planning in areas that are more like a suburban area? Because I mean, we've got suburbs with very little like local.
Right.
Like a shopping centre,
Right.
and then just massive houses around it.
Right.
Very little community culture, at least that's my view.
I have, and I think that is a challenge. I talked about that this morning, about the importance, the relationship between people and place, and how well-designed places help to build a strong sense of community. That we used to all live, learn, work, and play in the same place. Where you could go, you could walk to your shopping, you could walk to your job, you'd walk to your school, you'd walk to the park. And now we've created single-purpose places where we have bedroom communities where you just go to sleep, and where you drive a half hour to the mall, and where you drive an hour, you commute an hour to work, and you take your kids to the soccer complex somewhere. And so it's hard to build community when your lives are so disjointed. I talked this morning about the importance of bumping places, that community is all about bumping into the same people over and over again. So to build community, you need local bumping places. And when your lives are so disjointed, you don't bump into the same people. You have lots of different groups of people you bump with, but not enough with any one group to build a real strong sense of community. So, but I find that people everywhere have this desire for community. So there are many suburban communities where they're using community planning effort like this to try to rebuild their sense of community. About how do they create centers to the different neighborhoods? How do they create more bumping places? So I've seen it work in lots of places. I'm doing a lot of work now in places like Calgary, Edmonton, that just have sprawled like crazy. And they're very interested about how do they create more of an urban growth boundary, how do they create more density, how do they make the transit work, how do they make the business districts work so they're walkable. And there's a lot of interest by the residents as well in moving in that direction. So I think it's all the more reason to have a community plan.
There's one situation that's probably developed right throughout the whole community, is that with the changes of the community, the older people don't get to know much of the younger people.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of the reasons I have concerns. One of the things breaking down community are the very institutions that are trying to help community. So everything's being done in silos. So we've got senior services here. We've got the youth programs over here. We've got programs for people with disabilities over here. We got it backwards. It's sort of like the communities are being organized the way agencies are organized. So I'm a big proponent for how do we do things more of a place-based way? How do we start reconnecting those divisions that have been made? Because there's so much value. I'm just doing a whole series of gatherings around creating senior-friendly communities in the Seattle area. And the number one thing I hear from everybody is we want to create more of an intergenerational community. And there's some great tools. I know in Calgary, they've got a time banking program because they realize that the seniors need help shoveling their walks. and taking care of their gardens. And some of them need rides to the doctor or to the grocery store. But the young people have a lot that the seniors don't have. They know technology. They can teach computer skills. The older people, and the older people teach young people a trade and make them some great food. So they swap hours back and forth and in the process build relationships. Or there are lots of communities that are doing oral history projects where young people are interviewing the elders to learn about the history of their community and recording it. So some of my favorite projects cut across the generations, and a lot of those were done through the matching fund. So I went and I met with the superintendent of our parks and I said, great news, we're going to have this matching fund and we're going to get all these volunteers building new parks, building new equipment. She said, oh no we aren't. We don't want people messing with our parks. And I bit my tongue because I thought, whose parks are they? But when I listened to her, she had really good concerns. She was concerned about liability. She was concerned about maintenance. She was concerned about safety standards. All these issues. And that's what happens in every city I go to. That's one of the first, I was surprised it took a little while to get that question asked, because that's usually the first question people ask. And most cities I go to, that's what stops any kind of project. Every city I go to, there are community people who've been wanting to do a project, who have a great idea, and then they get to the bureaucracy, and all they get is red tape. And they get worn down after a while, because all they want to do is to build a garden, right? But they get all this red tape. So what we did was figured out how to take care of the red tape at the front end so we could cut through it and create a program that made it so groups could just focus on their projects. So what we do is we cover liability insurance through the matching fund during the construction process for the volunteers involved in the project. Secondly, what we do is we require pre-applications for large projects, and those are all reviewed by the appropriate department. So if it's a parks project, it would be reviewed by the parks department. And they're reviewing it against their safety standards. They're reviewing it against the budget, because a lot of these groups have never done projects before. And they give feedback to the applicants. And the applicants then take that into consideration, putting their final application together, which we also give to the department, and we will not give that application to the review team, the citizen review team, until it's been signed off by the department. In Seattle, we're all self-insured once a project's built, so we just want to make sure it's built to that the department's comfortable with the standards that it's been built to. In terms of maintenance, we work out maintenance agreements at the front end, and usually it's a fight over who gets to maintain it. Because the communities put so much work into it, and they can frankly afford to maintain it at a higher level. But if it's an existing project, if it's an existing park that's being redeveloped, then the Parks Department insists on doing it because of union issues, right? So we're just clear about that at the front end. And then we worked out things like, the big question was, how do you get money to groups that aren't incorporated or don't have nonprofit status? So what we do for that is we team them up with a group that can act as the first fiscal agent. So we team them up with a nonprofit or with an NGO. And that's been fantastic because it's been a good way to create better relationships partnerships between the associations and the nonprofits. We pay the nonprofit a little bit of money for their trouble, and that way the community can just focus on the project and doesn't have to worry so much about all the paperwork.
There's a couple of questions down this side. Before? Yeah, please.
I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the definition of a community. Is it location?
Yeah, good. So what I like to do, because oftentimes we use those words, we talk about community to mean both people and place. And I like to think about the neighborhood as a place with which we identify, and community is about our social relationships. It's about the extent to which we identify with one another and the extent to which we support one another. So I think in many ways a place can provide a wonderful context for community if it's designed in the right way so that you have bumping places, a common identity, a scale that's small enough where you can get to know one another, and a vehicle for collective action, work parties, the neighborhood association. But it's also true that there are other ways people can experience community. So for our immigrant communities into Seattle, they tend to identify with their cultural group rather than with the place because of common language, common culture. So we also support those groups. We fund communities of color, not just communities of place, to do matching fund projects. And there are all kinds of other communities as well. I am not a big fan of virtual communities. I do Facebook, I do LinkedIn. I think those can be wonderful tools to reinforce real community, but it's not a substitute for personal contact. Does that help?
It helps, it doesn't totally define it. We think about the area Canning and
Yeah.
our structures here.
Yeah,
We have Canning and Big Park and areas like that.
yeah,
I understand that through location and connections, you could actually overlap in those two areas.
yeah, that's right.
Within Canning, you've then got the suburbs and the authorities or
Right.
the council
Yeah.
areas within the council.
I like to think about communities as a group of people identify with and they come in contact with on a regular basis. So for me, it would be much more local than that. And so the strongest communities are often at the block level, you know. So community happens at place-based communities happen at lots of different levels. And I think the strongest connections tend to be the most local. But there's workplace communities, there's all kinds of communities. But in some ways, as I said before, if you got too many communities, you don't have any community.
I've lived in this community for about 30 years. And
Yeah.
I've been involved in play groups and I'm now
Great.
involved in a friends group.
Great.
And most of I've noticed a few old faces down here that I've known for over. a
Not
number
old
of
faces, but people you've known for a while. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Through school, through belonging to a community.
Yep,
And most of my friends are in this community.
yep, yep,
So often our relationships start early.
Yep.
Often in playgroup.
Yep.
They move to school.
Yep.
And then the kids move off to high school and
Yep.
then we tend to lose each other.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
now again, as we get older, we tend to reconnect as our kids go away.
Right.
And we start having time getting
Yep,
involved in
yep,
the community.
yep,
So I definitely see what you're trying to say, is that we need to build relationships with each other in the community. We have carousel where
Right.
we bump into each other. We have, as I said, various groups where we bump into each other.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of people I speak to, there is a very close connection. This is Cannington.
yep,
This Cannington area has a great history. It's where one of the first settlements took place. And from my opinion, the centre of Cannington, Roundabrook, Westfield and the Canning, this side, the east side of the train has been a bit neglected.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and a lot of people feel that they've been neglected.
So this morning I talked about it a little bit. I talked about there's clearly a role for government.
Yeah.
There's a reason we created government. There's things we can't do as communities or as individuals. Very important roles for government. Very important roles for nonprofit organizations to help people who are falling through the cracks. But there are so many roles that there's no substitute for community. When it comes to care,
Yeah.
when it comes to the environment, when it comes to public safety, emergency response, when it comes to our happiness, our democracy, social justice, there's no substitute for community. So I'm just a big believer that one function of government should be also, how do we tend to our democracy? How do we help build strong communities? It's not just, too oftentimes, particularly when budgets get tight, it's about, let's get back to basics, and we're just focusing on getting the roads done and maintaining the parks. What's more basic than democracy? What's more basic than our sense of community? I'm doing a lot of work in the UK right now, and they're, huge budget cuts, and the way the government's responding is they're training 5,000 community organizers. They're starting up a matching fund based on Seattle's of $126 million nationwide because they don't have money. They're saying we can't do it all ourselves. We need the community, and there's a lot of things the community does better.